Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2023 film Barbie. The film is directed by Greta Gerwig, who is a filmmaker that I was loosely familiar with because of the fact that she directed films like Lady Bird and Little Women, but those are movies that I actually haven't seen yet, but I've heard good things about. And I know that she was the director that Margot Robbie picked out. Margot Robbie reached out to Greta to get her on board to do this Barbie movie because Margot was a big fan of Greta's work. And considering, it's a Mattel film, it's a movie that Mattel is using to kickstart a new franchise, and it's a Warner Brothers film, I was really stunned by how much creative control Mattel and Warner Brothers allowed Greta Gerwig, as well as uh, uh, the writer Noah Baumbach, who collaborated with Greta on the script. I'm really stunned by how much creative control both parties allowed Greta and her writer to work with or to implement when it comes to this kind of film. And you could really see it when it comes to the direction of this movie. This is a film that is definitely glamorous. It's definitely got a lot of glitz to it. Definitely a sleek looking movie. But it's got a fairly consistent tone visually, where it has this very plastic, commercial look and feel to it early on. But once it starts to show some of the more shady or insidious aspects of reality in the real world, it kind of shows a little bit of a different style, but still maintains a consistent enough amount of visual camp and flair that even those scenes don't come across as too serious. So it's a film that visually could have easily been very distracting because you could jump from Barbie Land and it's pink and just total dollhouse aesthetic that's just completely plastic and fake, and then go from that to a less than idealized reality, and it could be a jarring transition, and that didn't really happen. I think Greta handled the transition from Barbie Land to the real world very well from a visual perspective. She shows the beauty in reality, as well as the beauty in Barbie Land, with the way that she directed the film. Uh, she also showed some really good comedic timing at times when it comes to some of the more humorous sequences. I think the dance number with the Kens is just a really terrific sequence, and it's not just the song that really makes that scene work. It's also Greta's direction because she gives it this just big size and scope and scale to it that makes it really come across like this gigantic Broadway musical number, or a musical number from one of those old fashioned musicals from the past that were released by major studios with big budgets and big stars. And yeah, she had a good selection of shots, a good usage of different kind of camera techniques that she employed here. It's a really nice looking film, and you can definitely tell that Greta knows her way around a camera, knows how to utilize and just emphasize the best aspects of a setting or a certain sequence or of fashion or of a certain star, and to really make them look great and look their best. Now, the screenplay is by Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach, and I don't feel that the script is as consistently good or as high quality as it could be, especially when it comes to the messaging and some of the characterization. But I do feel it's a good script, and I want to focus on the positives first before I start to delve into the more negative aspects of this script. For one, I think the way things open up with Barbie Land is really fun. It's really over the top and tongue in cheek, but that's exactly how it should be. That's exactly what you expect out of the opening of a Barbie movie, with everything being pink and all of the Barbies just being super bubbly and happy and so on and so forth. That's what makes the existential crisis bit that starts pretty soon after with Barbie even funnier, is because they set up this land as this just over the top bubbly peppy world where all the Barbies are pretty and beautiful, and all the Barbies love each other except for Midge. All the Barbies get rewards, or get actual awards, and they dance and they party all night, and then they just repeat the same cycle again the next day. And that's what makes the whole existential crisis stuff funnier, as well as the scenes with Weird Barbie, because it creates a very clear juxtaposition or divide between the superficial plastic Barbie land and reality. And that is something that I think definitely does work with this script. It creates some really genuinely funny bits of dark humor. I also feel that the satire, even though it's a little too on the nose sometimes, or it doesn't always provide a laugh, I think the satire is quite strong and definitely has a lot of wit to it. I think the way that it handles the extremes of both uh, femininity as well as masculinity is pretty funny. I think that there are some parts of it that are, like I said, laid on a bit too thick, or the joke is just not necessarily subtle enough to be truly clever. But I still feel that the satire is definitely one of the more consistently solid aspects of this script when it comes to dealing with social structures, gender norms, and so on and so forth. I also think the characterization, at least for Ken in particular, is good. Barbie is fine. I think it could have been better though, because the character, it seems like she's going to have a significant arc throughout the film, and it starts the arc, but it never really feels like it's fully completed, because she doesn't really have moments where you really see this character go through this shift and this change. You see her be upset that she's no longer pretty and she's got cellulite and she's no longer perfect and beautiful and so on and so forth. And she goes into a shell. But other than that, you don't really see her change that much. So when there's that scene where she chooses to be human with Ruth, it doesn't have the same resonance as I think it could. But I think her character is still ultimately relatively well realized. Ken, on the other hand, is a much more flesh and blood characterization. This is a character you definitely do sympathize with, even though in a lot of ways Ken is kind of an antagonist, but he's an antagonist with a plan and an execution of the said plan that is very understandable because of the way that the script is written. Like, you sympathize with him and you really do feel for him early on when he just wants to be with Barbie. He wants her to love him, but she doesn't really love him back. And he wants to be there and hang out with her, but she's like, "No, Ken, go away, Ken. It's girls' night." And he's like, "What? But, I just want to spend time with you, Barbie." And she's like, "No, you can't do that. That's not possible. You're not allowed." And so he gets shut out. And when he gets a taste of reality, of the real world, where men actually do have more free will, and men do have more uh, uh, worth, and definitely have a lot more people in the world that actually do feel that men are worth something. And it doesn't just include other men. He realizes, hey, things can be different. So then he takes what he learned, even though he doesn't really know exactly what it is, and applies it to Barbie Land. And so he creates the Kendom, and you have the Mojo Dojo Casa House with the mini fridges everywhere, and he brings the patriarchy to all the other Kens, and it becomes this dystopian nightmare world, but from a male perspective, compared to the dystopian nightmare world in the beginning of the movie, which was strictly from a female perspective. So I do feel that his motivation is very clear. You understand it. You get why he goes all out with it, and he's wearing the fur coats and the double sunglasses and so on and so forth. And you also understand why, once that's all stripped away, and once he realizes that Barbie doesn't really love him, that it's something that really devastates him, because he questions his place in Barbie Land and his just place in the world that he lives in. And when Barbie tells him that, oh hey, not every night has to be Ken's night, and by the way, it's okay, you can just be Ken. Doesn't have to be Ken and Barbie. You can just be Ken. And that's a moment of self-realization for Ken's character, where he realizes he doesn't have to be tied into what other men think about him or other women think about him. He can be just Ken and be whatever Ken he wants to be. He's Knuff. And I think that's a really good message, and it's a good arc for his character. He goes through a bit of a villain arc, but then has redemption at the end, where he realizes, maybe that wasn't the best way or the best plan, but I still have self-worth. And I think that's a really great arc. Plus, Ken gets some of the best lines of comedy, like the whole stuff where he's wondering why he can't just do surgery because he's a man. He's like, what? Why not? Because you don't have a college degree, you don't have any qualifications. But I'm a man. Isn't that enough? Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the bit in Beavis and Butthead Do the Universe, where Beavis and Butthead learn about white privilege, and then they just go around doing all kinds of crazy shit, and then they're all like, what? We have white privilege. When people confront them, they're like, what are you doing? It's like, what? We have white privilege. Like, that reminds me of that, and I like comedy like that. I like subversive comedy like that, and that's pretty funny. But yeah, the film is definitely a lot more interesting when it comes to the characterization with Ken than it is with Barbie or the human characters. So yeah, I feel the best characterization is definitely with Ken. Now, in terms of other aspects of the script that I liked, I mean, the fish out of water stuff, when Barbie and Ken are together in the real world, even though it's a bit off when it comes to the execution, especially early on, it's fun. It's got the right tone for the most part. It's just a shame that Barbie and Ken aren't really together that much in the real world, which is kind of what you thought you were going to get from the marketing. So when you see the movie and they're not really in it a ton together, it's honestly kind of a letdown. And I do feel that that's something that really is at the fault of the script and the film screenwriters when it comes to the approach that they decided to take with this story. And that leads to the negatives for me. And a lot of it has to do with the messaging. Well, I think the message at the end of the film is actually quite good. The message is that you don't have to be tied into social structures whether you're a man or a woman in society. You don't need a patriarchy, you don't need a matriarchy, you just need you, and you're enough. And I think that's honestly a really great message, but it's kind of lost in translation and it's muddled because of the way that things are written. Because there's not really a clear delineation between the real world and Barbie Land. Even though I think the writers are definitely trying to do that, it doesn't really come across as clear. So it really does feel like there's a lot of blurred lines happening. And then you have the messaging, which at times is like a sledgehammer in your face with America Ferrera's character, Gloria, who's talking about how hard it is to be a woman in society and just going through what might as well be a bunch of word vomit, feminist word vomit. And it just comes across way too forced and way too heavy handed and way too preachy. And that also affects the whole plot with the Barbies, where they are brainwashed by these rants from Gloria about being a woman and the patriarchy, and that causes them to break out of whatever trance they were in, but the script never really showed them in a trance to begin with. You just see them acting differently when they're living under the kingdom, but it didn't necessarily make it clear that what they were doing under the kingdom was really that bad. Where I think they honestly made it more clear that Barbie Land, the way that it was before the Kens took over, was a lot worse because of the fact that it's just so vapid and materialistic and selfish and just shallow. And then you have the Kingdom, and yeah, the Kens are making the Barbies a little more subservient to them, and Barbies are dressing more scantily clad and so on and so forth, and they're doing a lot of stuff strictly for the Kens. But the way that the script wrote this whole dynamic, it just felt like it wasn't really that bad. So it's one of those things where it seems like that's supposed to be something that's inherently awful, and things need to be changed back to the status quo, where and the way that they were with the Barbies back in control. But it didn't really feel like that was necessary, because the Barbies didn't seem like they were completely miserable under the Kens. In fact, there was even a line of dialogue where one of the Barbies was talking about how they actually like it a lot better than the way things were. And having lines that try to say that, oh, well, you're a physicist, you shouldn't be dressing like that. That doesn't really work for me. That doesn't make this feel like it's a nightmare that we have to wake the Barbies up from. And oh, the Kens are talking about the Godfather, and they're singing songs to the Barbies, and they're doing all this other stuff. That doesn't really feel like it's necessarily that awful either. So the writers did a bad job, I think, when it comes to really making that feel like it's something that's so awful and abhorrent that it needs to be changed immediately. So that made it so the whole bit with the Barbies working together to deprogram each other and take back the government, it made it just feel very flat. As flat as Barbie's feet during an existential crisis, because there's just no stakes, because it didn't seem like it was that bad to begin with. And that ties into another problem with the script, the lack of stakes. Like, where are the stakes in this narrative? There isn't really any. Oh, Barbie has to be put back in a box, or has to go back to Barbie Land with Ken, because it'll be catastrophic for Mattel and for the world. But you never really see the result of that, other than when the Kens decide to take over Barbie Land and the Mojo Dojo Casa House becomes a huge bestseller over the Barbie Dream House. But other than that, like, you don't really see much of a ripple effect when it comes to the effects on society, or the real world. And the ripple effect, it doesn't even seem that bad either. It's like, okay, yeah, the Mojo Dojo Casa House is kind of stupid, but how is it any more dumb than the Barbie Dream House? And it's selling well. And it doesn't show like other parts of society crumbling, just Mattel no longer having the Dream House be a bestseller, and now instead of it being, a girl orientated company, at least brand, now Ken is the focus of things, and Ken sells more dolls, and Ken's Playhouse sells more units. It's like you're still making money, so it didn't really feel like it was that bad of a thing for Mattel, and didn't feel like it was that awful of a scenario for the real world. It's not like alternate 1985 and Back to the Future Part 2. Like if they showed something like that, like where the society is changing, so then it's a patriarchy that's completely out of control, that'd be one thing, but you don't see that. So really does come across like there's no stakes in the story. And Ken and his whole arc and his whole villain turn doesn't really feel like there's a lot there either, because his motivations are justified and clear, and you really kind of are on his side. And that also ties into the fact that, oh well, the Barbies have this whole thing where they're living under the kingdom and they want things to return to the status quo, but the way that things are in the kingdom don't really appear to be that apocalyptic either. So it hurts the stakes in the film. Oh, the whole stuff with Gloria and her daughter Sasha, and they go back to Barbie Land. We can't have that. Like Mattel is trying to stop them from doing that, but there's never really anything that comes of that either. There's no effect. There's no cause and effect. If there's any cause and effect, it's way too minor when it comes to the narrative and the script. So that is definitely an issue with the movie. Also, at times, the comedy is just lame and kind of cringe. Um, but other than the lack of stakes, like the worst part of it is the messaging and just how muddled it is and how it comes across as too one-sided. I don't think it's entirely a man-hating movie that hates everything that's masculine and is propping everything that's feminine up and trying to be this feminist power fantasy. I don't really buy that explanation or that interpretation of this script. I don't agree with it, but I can understand why some people view this screenplay and ultimately the film that way, because of the fact that there's a lot of the stuff with the patriarchy, and there's a lot of stuff that's dunking on men and toxic masculinity and the worst traits of men around other men and how they treat other women and so on. And it doesn't feel as equal as I think it honestly could. It doesn't help I already have that line at the end with Helen Mirren's character who does the narration, and she talks about how, oh, the Kens, they'll eventually have the same power and opportunity that women in the real world have, but they're gonna have to start from the ground up. And that's intended to be like a cheeky comment, like a bit of social commentary, but it just comes across as incredibly heavy-handed and honestly just makes the entire movie just feel kind of pointless in terms of the whole Ken saga and everything involving Barbie Land being turned into a kingdom, because there never really was a clear resolution or a clear compromise. Like, yeah, there's a bit of equality, but not much. None of the Kens can actually be a part of the Barbie Supreme Court. And just because you're trying to make it tie into what is actually occurring in reality, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is something that really helps this film end on a more satisfying note. It's just more forced messaging, and it also just makes things kind of even more confusing. Not kind of, it makes things even more confusing when it comes to the messaging, because it's like, okay, what are the writers trying to say here? Are they trying to say that life under a patriarchy is not ideal, and neither is the matriarchy? If that really is what they're trying to do, they should have done a better job showing how life under the patriarchy sucks for the Barbies in Barbie Land, and for women in the real world, other than just forced rants by Gloria, or the just cartoonish over the top scene when Barbie and Ken come back. Well, I don't. They don't come back. They come into the real world for the first time, and Barbie is immediately catcalled and assaulted. Like, that whole bit comes across as very clunky, because it seems so cartoonish and over the top. It seems like something you would see in Barbie Land, not in reality. So it does. It makes the messaging feel confused and conflicting. And that's frustrating, because I do think the message at the end of it is really good, especially the message for men, that you are enough, that you don't have to be uh, so tied into the kind of women that you're around or you chase, or your relationship with other women, or how other men perceive you when it comes to your relationships. Like, you don't have to be identified by that. And I think that's a great message, but there's just a lot of stuff that's lost in translation, or it's just not really that well thought out. And it doesn't help either that it's, even though it's PG-13, and there are a lot of attempts at being edgy and darker and dealing with very adult themes and subject matter, it still can only dip its toe under the surface of this subtext, because it's still ultimately a product for Mattel, and a product for wider audiences. Just to mention one last thing that didn't work for me about it is the human characters. Whether it's the Mattel boardroom and the CEO, or Gloria and Sasha. The Mattel boardroom, the CEO played by Will Ferrell, like, you can't really paint them as clear-cut villains, because, Mattel wouldn't have any of that. So they're just very boring characters, and they just feel like exaggerated stereotypes, and they're very cartoonish and silly and over the top. And they're supposed to be insincere because, oh, they want to make girl toys, and they're upset that the Mojo Dojo Casa House is selling so much. But it just doesn't really feel like they really matter that much when it comes to the script or the plot, and really, honestly, any significant way. It's almost like, why even have them there? Like, just have more scenes with Barbie trying to connect with Sasha and Gloria, or have more sequences with Barbie and Ken. Like, why do we need to have the Mattel stuff? It just doesn't really feel like that focus was really needed. Also, going back to Gloria and Sasha, like, Gloria, there's something there with the whole, she's the one that's causing all these changes to happen to stereotypical Barbie, because she's thinking about a lot of complex and just really extreme emotions, and she's dealing with a lot, and she's projecting that onto this doll. And it's actually an intriguing thing to work with, because it was a good initial a bit of conflict for the film. Barbie and Ken have to go to the real world to find out who is causing these changes to happen in Barbie Land, so they can stop it, so things don't continue to go awry. And the human characters, though, they honestly feel just as plastic as Barbie and Ken, or even more so. because Gloria is just she's a soapbox. She's a walking, talking soapbox for feminist, hot button issues. Her daughter is like the most hyper woke mean girl you can think of, who breaks Barbie down to the point where she cries. And then by the end of the film, she's supposed to have transitioned into a less harder edged, loving daughter who has more of an appreciation for Barbie as well as her mother. And that never really comes across in any genuine way because it just feels very uh, half-assed. Really, it feels like a very half-assed a bit of writing with with those characters, specifically her character. So yeah, the human characters, the script did a bad job really making them feel like not only are they completely totally necessary when it comes to the plot and the narrative and the way things unfold, but also when it comes to uh their characters and just the depth. There's really not much depth to them at all. So they just come across as very boring, and their scenes are boring when the film is focused on these human characters. The spirit, the ghost of Ruth is a much more compelling character than Sasha or Gloria or the Mattel boardroom combined. Now, the cast for Barbie, I think, is very bountiful and just full of a lot of genuinely just great performers and great personalities. It's definitely a film that is supported immensely by its two main stars, and Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling as Barbie and Ken. There are other actors and actresses who play different versions of Barbie and Ken, but it's Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling who really do provide the most standout portrayals. And Margot Robbie was just magnificent. I thought she was marvelous. I thought she really did an incredible job bringing this very plastic character to life. Uh, Staying true to the character when it comes to showing what stereotypical Barbie is supposed to be in the opening of the movie, and handling it with a certain sense of seriousness that made it all work. Where a different actress or a different performer could just be in on the joke too much, and then it would just make everything just appear to be just very forced and just feel off in so many different ways when it comes to performance. But Margot didn't do that. She also gave the role a certain sense of nuance, provided a lot of layers to it because this is a performance that needed to have a lot of different moments where Barbie experiences human emotions for the first time, deals with an existential crisis, deals with what it's like to be faced with reality and not be perfect and not be pretty all the time. And so I feel that that is definitely something that really works because of the fact that Margot is such a genuinely talented actress. You can also tell that she was very passionate about this performance. This is a very much a passion project and a passion role for her. And you can just tell that she's just having a really good time with it. And it's not just for the fashions or for the makeup or any of this other stuff or the superficialness of playing Barbie. It's for bringing a different perspective to Barbie that you really didn't see before when it comes to at least what people envision or see Barbie as uh, in other forms of media. Now, like I said, there are other actresses and actresses who play different Barbies. I mean, Kate McKinnon is the biggest standout to me as Weird Barbie because she is Weird Barbie. She's just really good at playing these weird, off kilter kind of characters. But in other films, they overdo it, so her character just becomes very irritating. And In Barbie, they didn't do that. They were like, hey, we know Kate McKinnon can be a little bit too much to take for some people. So we're going to have her in the film, but we're not going to just constantly shove her down your throat. We're going to ease up on that, and as a result, she's more palatable. She's more entertaining because she's not just constantly in your face all the time with this weirdness. So much to the point where it just becomes a cringe fest. Like I said, there are other actresses who play Barbies. I guess Issa Rae is the President Barbie and so on and so forth, but they're fine, but they don't really have a lot to do. And they're just kind of there to add to the cast, make the cast list longer, and have different variations of Barbies. They're really not that integral to the main plot or the main arc of the film. Ryan Gosling, on the other hand, is very important, and his performance is just amazing. He's so great in this. He handled the role with the right amount of just campiness as well as sincerity, to the point where, even though this is a plastic character who's notoriously well known as being just an accessory to Barbie, he winds up stealing the entire movie because he's just so charismatic and he's so funny, and he's such a good actor that when you get to the moments where he's just struggling with not being someone that Barbie really loves, that it becomes something that's honestly kind of heartbreaking. And it's because of Ryan Gosling's take on the character. He also sang his own vocals for I'm Just Ken, so that just makes his performance just even more impressive. Yeah, huge fan. Enormous fan of Ryan Gosling's performance in this as Ken. The other Kens, kind of similar thing to the Barbie. To the Barbies, the other Barbies, just kind of kind of there. Simu Liu supposed to be like this antagonist or this rival Ken, and there are times where you can kind of feel that energy or that Kenergy, but there's other times where it's just kind of not really anything that special, mainly just because of just how shallow and just weak the writing is for a lot of these other Kens. Same thing with the other Barbies. The human performers, America Ferrera as Gloria, and Ariana Greenblatt as Sasha, or Will Ferrell as the CEO, or the other guys who play the other Mattel employees, or Rhea Perlman as the spirit of Ruth Handler. They're fine. I would say the biggest standout out of that group is Rhea Perlman as the spirit of Barbie's creator, Ruth. It was just a treat and a joy to see Rhea again. And she was just really good. Just really handled that role with the right balance, and that role really needed. You bought this character as a wise, beyond their years mentor, but you also saw her as someone who was more than just like a spirit from a bygone era. Like this is a character that was aware of the way that things are and the way that things should be, and it wasn't afraid to say things like the patriarchy is made up and so on and so forth. And there's just a lot of endearing aspects to the performance, it also helps that of course you got Rhea Perlman, who's just a great actress. She's a great performer, and it was just really a lot of fun to see her again. Michael Cera, forgot to mention him, probably because his character is pretty forgettable, Alan. But Cera does the best he can with what is ultimately a pretty forgettable character. Um, but that's kind of the point, because that's, he's just Alan. Uh, America Ferrera, I don't mind her as an actress. I'm not going to blame her too much for how just painfully forced her speech came across. That's because of the writing. That's not really because of her. But I was just very indifferent on her character in general. But there were a couple moments where her character, there was a bit of charm that I could kind of get behind, like the moment where she's kind of fangirling at Barbie. But other than that, a lot of the performance is it just felt like the writers were just like, hey, you need to play this character in this particular box. And I felt the same way about Ariana Greenblatt, at least when it comes to like one half of her performance. Like the first half of her performance as the edgy, uh, hyper woke character who just tears Barbie down to the point where Barbie cries. Like that was believable. That was authentic to me. That was a good performance. When it comes to her being more soft in terms of around the edges and her being more open to Barbies and all of this other stuff, that came across the complete opposite to me. I didn't buy it at all. And I think that kind of speaks to the limitations of Ariana as an actress. Speaking of limitations, Will Ferrell playing the same guy he's always played in everything, and I'm getting tired of it at this point. It's just a really tired shtick, and it's just one of those things where I'm just glad he's not in it a lot. Otherwise, I would be even less of a fan of the movie. And the other actors and actresses, Helen Mirren played the narrator. She was good, but really, of course, when it comes to the cast, like the main attraction is Ryan Gosling and Margot Robbie, and both of them are great. And that's why it's kind of a shame that they're not together on screen as much as you think they're going to be, because there's a good chunk of the movie where they're split up. And the movie definitely, like I said when I was talking about the script, it just definitely isn't as engaging when those two aren't on the screen because they just have such great chemistry with one another. So yeah, good cast for the most part. Cinematography by Rodrigo Prieto, it's fine. I wouldn't say fine. I think it's actually pretty spectacular, especially when it comes to showcasing Barbie Land and everything that is a part of that just fantasy world of just pink everything. The editing by Nick Hoy, I definitely felt was rather honorable, especially when it comes to the more just kind of crazy, chaotic, just weird, surreal sequences. A lot of the stuff in Barbie Land or in the Kingdom, or the scenes where they're going to Barbie Land, or leaving Barbie Land and going to the real world. The editing definitely did match the tone that they were trying to go for, and it added some extra energy to some of the scenes as well. The music by Mark Ronson, Andrew Wyatt, it's fine, but really the main thing that you take away musically from this film is not really the score, it's the songs from the soundtrack. And the biggest hit to me is I'm Just Ken, with guitar solo work by Slash and Wolfgang Van Halen. That song is incredibly catchy. It's constantly playing on a loop in my head as I record this video. It's a really catchy, fun song, like a throwback to like 80s power ballads like Journey or a song by Queen or something. Epic, but also witty and funny and just has a lot of charm. I love that song. There's some other good songs like What Was I Made For by Billie Eilish. Wasn't super big on the cover of Barbie Girl with like the hip hop influence and so on, but it was there. But yeah, the Pink song that opened the film was pretty jazzy. Definitely a song that was definitely very glitzy and glamorous and fit what they were trying to go for. Um, but yeah, it's one of those soundtracks that I would say for the most part is pretty solid, pretty solid. But the biggest hit is I'm Just Ken. It's an entertaining popcorn film that's very fluffy, very glitzy, very glamorous, very over the top, but it also wants to be taken seriously, and it doesn't really work in that way. So it's one of those movies where it's fun and entertaining, but it's not as deep as it thinks it is. Or if it's trying to be deep, it doesn't really handle that as well as it does all of the other over the top cotton candy craziness. It's one of those movies where it's definitely what you expect it's going to be, but also kind of not. So it's one of those movies where it's absolutely an acquired taste. Anyway, thanks for watching my review of Barbie, and until next time, I'll see you later. I'm just Ken. Anywhere else I'd be a 10. Is it my destiny to live and die a life of blonde fragility? I'm just Ken. Where I see love, she sees a friend. How can I make her see the man behind the tan and fight for me? And I'm just Ken enough, and I'm great at doing stuff. I'm just Ken.